KOJO Oppong NKRUMAH Atenase. Honorable Akwa beti saying?
Yenua. Na also to say.
Adom. Bibi ekwe.
Nyami adom.
Constituency boko.
Nyami adom.
Works and housing
Nyami adom. Ukwade be nyami adoma Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia Babesrai or Ofonsia Yobi constituency.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes, so yeah, in fact, and they all resume the campaign and they or Achimoda was also suspended for a week to finish work
on the manifesto
and to prepare for the launch. No, yeah, and they are sequence or alcohol until you marry or MC Youth Connect to Achimoda, then Benada. Yeah, was withdraw and then chance. Then Ukwada Nopa if you say of
Fosia Rebi. It is our Bamo enclave or enclave near the Achemansa enclave
block. Yeah.
Okay. In your Dania, then you know Achemansa block
can be a cinema so across so a chance Achem dance Swedru and Fosia constituency.
And Aquatia.
There be Aquatia or Sika mine block.
Oh, okay.
Until Momo can block.
Oh, okay. Okay. Inti, you served as vice chairman. Our manifesto committee. How long na muputi document way together?
A little over 5 months. The inauguration, if I remember, was somewhere in February. If I recall correctly, it was somewhere in February. Okay, Kamboma 5 months plus an idea area.
Okay. In the for chairman and the vice chairman of this committee, not Muruli, then what were you doing? Who in particular?
Into chairman or say chairman Sabonsu, myself vice chairman Evron Hughes, Mana or secretary.
Okay.
And Sana Fanese technical support team to the manifesto committee. No, Yen Yejuma mostly was defining the parameters within which various subcommittees in Yejuma, facilitating the work of the subcommittees. No. Now, collating the work of the subcommittees, you know, and taking them through a process of justification. We justify every single, you know,
policy proposal.
More importantly, you align policy proposal and our commitment, you know, with your leader and the vision, any part in the philosophy, as well as the constitution and the laws of Ghana. And the proposal way back. The stakeholders are not engaged here. I don't think I proposal on the air ban. Rationale and saying how does it align with leader and vision? How does it align with party and philosophy in particular? And that's a very critical point because your parties are liberal, your parties are conservative. You know, conservative. What are the conservative solutions? What are the liberal solutions? It's party in ideology. In fact, in the manifesto, one of the very first things that we do is that we take you back to the famous quotation by J.B. Dankwa that says that this party's policy is to liberate the energies of the people for the growth of a property-owning democracy in this land, with right to life, freedom and justice as the principles which the government and the laws of the land should be dedicated to, in order specifically to enrich life, property and liberty of each and every citizen. That's the gravamen of party known philosophy. Then we put it together for your leader and the advisors now also to consider. And them saying the last 1 week, you hear the process that he went through in the last 1 week was to fine-tune those analysis, you know, and then to give the green light for the final ones that we're going to come to town with. And Sana Enra on Wajina Simpiso. About the 14 highlights in the entire manifesto document.
In putting this together, no, the leader of Mopatini role in way then what did he do?
First of all, no define a vision. Who's the first? So the kind a major policy speech or UPSC and set a vision, no, set a agenda. And Obekaya UPSC, we kept making the point say at every point in time, say party no leader for fra. Party no leader no one anchoring on your constitution, Ghana Mra, and then the philosophy of the party, which I've just read out to you, no. Or no student vision ebeto abonting ebi enyina ye wom enyina ye som aban no but obia wo vision bia osusu say you pay attention to what ede ebeko anim. And we reiterated from Dankwa to Buzia to Dombo to Dubuahin to J. Kufuor to Nanado. Obia na baby an vision efa. And Oba UPS, and he outlined his vision. Sa vision no na fear the broad framework Ejuma we say. And then in the end, Ejuma had to come back to him for him to compare it to the vision, to the philosophy of the party, to the laws of the land, and then narrow down on the final ones that he put before us.
Were there some proposals from the committee as leader, no share say no, where the union frame, where the fan where the union frame?
You can be sure, say, in a process like that, there will be things that will be pruned. And there may be any feasibility near there. Yesusu say, within the 4-year period, no, it will be difficult to execute it. No, we took it out, and then maybe funny say calculations. Maybe a lower point, higher point.
Yes.
He decided that he will come to the lower point. And to be to say a decision to cut budget expenditure by about 3% of GDP and give it to the private sector to take up as opportunities. You know, you find there was a lower figure of 3% of GDP and a higher figure. After economic modeling now, you call numbers 3% of GDP, about 30 billion Ghana cedis.
Okay.
Into your analysis, and he opted to stick with the 3% of GDP, which is the lower number, which is perhaps some will say is even an underestimation of what can be done on that promise. So, of course, some of these things will say obey adjustments, kakra. But in the end, no, this is the bold body of commitment.
Okay. The other thing will be listening to him, Enra Ewa Takra, I got the at least understanding from the MTA, say or starting the intro no build yaba see ne toa wako and nyoma wati free Ghana for and or encapsulate problems out here into 3.
That's right.
Say cost of living. Roads,
infrastructure,
roads and infrastructure, and jobs, Nyoma miensa. Are these actually the problems in Ghana for face?
Oh, these are not the only issues that Ghana for a raise with him.
Okay.
In fact, so we manifesto anymore under chapter 2, dear friend, our commitments.
Yes.
Was sum up the entire manifesto into 14 parts.
Okay.
Top 3 penna time allowing no obubodin. The first thing or can one sem so only Ghana for do na di nkoma omo pese omunya answers solutions to economic rebound and economic expansion. Yen nyina agitum say yesikasem ho train kakra.
Yes.
Yen nyina so agitum say rebound it. How do you sustain the rebound and how do you expand the economy? Economic expansion is important because say economy no expand there and nipa dodo enya adwumaye businesses emubi no minor den etumpo. Number 1 on his agenda was sustaining and expanding the economic rebound. Number 2, drawing from that one, how do you create new jobs? Because you can have jobless growth and you can have growth jobs. The penny say growth no ebeba, stability and growth no beba, but no so na ejuma So he spent time to outline one of the first were creating new jobs with some very exciting propositions. Number 3, something about tax reforms. Nina as a economy ni huasem, but we tax reforms ni si as a special issue and not per se or discuss it for the very long time. Parties are holding a major tax overhaul. He wants to do a major tax reform along the lines of what's happening in Estonia and other places, or discuss here. Obeka iso or saying ya bre discuss cost of living as a separate item. And now can for kasa ya koran. In fact, just last week near Akwetia, I'm be rubber or full stage in the bar in chain. Some of Beka so and yema drink kakra. Mrs. and Kamutu Mima and Yinamankania ebo ejina na se bafom ana se senia de bi omototo transport bo ne mo to meet so ana se ejina se need na enka bebo anti cost of living ya there all around nyina no ote e ho asem and kan road and infrastructure ho asem as a separate item. Other issues as part of the 14 headlines na yebobo so no back healthcare. After the bidu agenda 111, how do we improve healthcare for the everyday Ghanaian? Emma, for example, women and girls, a day not dedicated. One of the major issues that Ghana for agency education. President Kufuor capitation grant. NDC for Babem 8 years after President Kufuor, but it took Nanado to come back and come and move it from capitation grant to free senior high school. And there, free senior high school no issues to know as the new leader of the party. hopefully the President of the Republic from 2025, no, and then person or yefa educational reforms, no, can you know, and good governance and anti-corruption, or can want some protecting our environment, or can want some creative arts, sports and tourism, or can want some. And one thing Uncle Vom pay attention to, care for the elderly. Mrewa, Nkokra, Mesriwa, Penifua, Sebomiyari Kakra, Kwabene, Bafaso home, and finally security. I think the theme we used was protecting your borders, keeping our neighborhood safe, and also can was. I mean, you know, correct 3 we a top 3. They are kind of top 3, but formal part of like the 14 big issues kind of for Idihun Command. I don't know how to find the expression in the manifesto.
The manifesto. Before we ever into some specifics, no, will I be right to say? I mean, one thing that jumped at me and say this manifesto is unlike more other manifesto, at least from 2008. But from 2008, the manifesto was a bit heavy on social intervention because free SHS was a big deal in there. More repeating in 2012, in 2016. This manifesto is a bit silent on social interventions, like the big social intervention ticket. A deliberate,
well, manifesto be who outlining a number of issues. There are some of the issues Bon say nipa bebre esum say at this time we need the biggest issue in TPC esum. Obekaya 2016 manifesto na free SHS ewum. But at the same time, so now one district, one factory.
Yes.
As were other policy commitments. But because of how not free SHS debate, you know, Union Aquatia from 2008, sponsor advert tia, a cassette tia, I mean, some more kind in idea, they are matters of public record, say, and Kabe Yanka Kwame Nkrumah and Russia 4 years, and Yadi be a bit take him say 20 years and sana a year, Ubizo 20 billion, say 2 billion, now on fan yet. All of those things, Nathan. Ebema, the debate on free SHS, ebe heightened. But it was not the only promise in the manifesto. Again, in this manifesto, no, there are, at least from what I'm outlining to you, there are 14 issues I try address in this manifesto. Say they have learned a lesson. Say you can't be beer. They should not rush to say any possible any because I realizing say it draws a lot more attention to those issues, and people begin to interrogate the issues and realize the MPP for canon it may look difficult, it may look high, but they are looking at some track record to me. And more attacking the money be my own say but it's early days yet. Say na so de beba. Yes. The aye can so de eba na fi pick issue ni say unemployment. It's not just merely saying say and for page man for page man for page man debi. It is about Mahmoud Bawumia the policy propositions on jobs here day. And now Ira John Dramani Mahama Wadaroma also policy proposition on jobs here day. And the Ghanaian will have an opportunity to compare and make a decision.
I'll come back to some of the specifics. Now ansana no the credibility of the person making the promise matters. I remember say more 2008 manifesto was titled An Agenda for Jobs.
Yeah, change an agenda for jobs.
Yeah, change an agenda for jobs. From 2008, 2012, 2016, but even in 2016 there was something about jobs in there.
In fact, 2016 and a change an agenda for jobs.
Change an agenda for jobs. Yeah. Okay. And if 8 years down the line jobs is still major issue, then the credibility of that promise, Ghana for Besheni 2-2, no?
So, our population are bare 60% plus a youth.
Yes.
Which also means a very fertile. Which also means omu area school ababon jobs will be a key issue for decades. And now America more jobs reports about almost every month unemployment data, but because jobs will remain an issue.
Yes.
But the credibility of promises on jobs, one of the ways you can track it is say, and yes, I mean, you go back to when they make a promise, and a track record on jobs a day. Maybe to me a catcher or say 2017 January 7th. I had the financial at the Danko Kufu Adunsem ABC ene. And yes, I mean, America SNIT data says that nothing less than 2.3 million jobs have been registered onto the SNIT database. And no year or more register was SNIT. Inti se wo juxtapose for more enquire the number will be north of that. But conservative estimates, 2.3 million jobs and created in this period. Now, so be our created 2.3 million jobs, formal jobs recorded on the SNIT database in a 7-year period. Or catcher will say, man, another opportunity. No will be created jobs. In fact, no will be catcher and say, what's the same in human it could be north of about 3 million. FM. I mean, some of the
new job opportunities
who are going through it said the new job opportunities now you can also say it could be about 3 million. And I'm saying, well, I may have seen the estimates that we've done, but I know they work before this manifesto, so but he's not far from the truth. You can believe, you can be sure, you can trust, said this administration. And if you take jobs, for example, and a year for jobs. For example, we are starting off with about 1 million youth in digital skills opportunity because we are moving towards a big digital economy. Minya opportunity Casa or manifesto launch. I spoke about digitization, and I was trying to explain to the whole nation that digitization one and end in itself. Architecture, infrastructure, be a bibi. Tiabra ye Ghana Post, don't go for Ghana Post. You almost see over here 1 million address and can we? Okay, Ghana card, then Ghana card, the bedi, be more videos or social media. So who could jump baby na come to have Ghana card coach be no problem. Mobile money interoperability. So you could connect money from network to network and from network to bank accounts and other payment platforms. Be more na say we crampo the nan accepting switch be nescap keke na mo save no problem. I feel the mention in aboma akwala bi ti ajiringa no akire ho we school or ye duane wo fie. So call Instagram ultimate try na duane no picture de to ho e de nyom to ase. Now we're connecting the payment platform to and then the digital address to. Bisu tinifi no so afa ne phone say Ghana card any eSIM registry no ya kan bom to bi tinifi no ahwe no order aduane no atua ka by momo na akoka ni po ye aduane ne nsa na dispatch order be fa find the address na de call obi enya adwuma obi enya sika all through that digital interface. No, now say you perceive digitization called 2.0, and there are quite a number of things that are under the new digital state home. That level of digitization, you need a lot more people with digital knowledge and skills, and we are estimating say about 1 million people, 1 million young Ghanaians to be trained for digital jobs here in Ghana, across Africa, and the world. That alone, because this first term, Fana said this first chapter, we didn't do 1 million digital jobs. In Kanye, NAD do 2.3 million. Said the year no cry to me to us, we now do in Kwambeka, that alone is 3 million. That alone cries 3 million. And sana several other to say, for example, private sector expansion, I say, EBA back, construction, infrastructure development, industrialization, and agribusiness. And near my watch, and the housing in Kwa. Master developers are through the incentives package no ebeba just under the housing program, access to housing for all in ebeba Tesano 320 units are yede come police for nansen adan bisa omso nipa be 500 and a year juma. Now can you imagine if you are doing multiples of this across the country? We are introducing an SME bank. Mami oton indomie wa he across the street. Omo eton niam across the street. Bebre ubisa ne say nti bank ben na obekwa akwa save akwaje business. Because say banks no ye kwa ye business na ye no mo ntiase o. Omo pe certificate of registration and a certificate of incorporation and years of banking record. Omo nti ye de na se. Nti Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, one of the significant promises they say ye per se ye be a bank specifically for small and medium scale enterprises. So it's not a bank that is going to focus on retail business, but they're going to focus on SMEs. So say, remember, say through the development bank, you told me the Sikaba to support SMEs, and the development bank being a wholesale bank, and yes, these Canada banks no more, but banks no bureaucracy no more procedures. Listen, your money SMEs interfacing and so any. So now we want to have a dedicated bank, an SME banker. Or more to me a channel say can or more can development banker or to me a channel no directly to SMEs because they better understand the SME framework. And Unkwa is going to create tens of thousands of jobs within the SME framework. Bibi said the Women's Trade Empowerment Fund, WOTEF. I no say yede ba ede abeshe rural banks no sapo munsiu. Or more to me assume ye ma me mo edidwa.
In the WOTEF no will not be a bank.
No, it's not a bank.
A fund.
Because you see, banks were
sure.
Banks no more.
Sure.
But to be out to say there's a particular type of business banks no omuntia say no relationship form like SMEs. Nti no to assume so we create a dedicated bank for them. So first there's a bank for housing and construction and a industrial bank. Nti no a type of business. But say gender there. I mean, I know the NDC is promising say create
women's bank.
Well, I know your one promise. Yema di jani ade ombetie. No man say so bank bi why you kwa omka say omo because yenye ma na and I say because yenye mema na. Is that the real problem? It is okay say bank ombehwe ma nko eno na be solve problem na yema na beti omo di dwa edwam omo ti ase yen asem ye kan say yen ne omo tena ase na omo kire yen the kind of sika omo hia e wo dwam e di dwa bosin ade be ma di dwa wo dwam ne ade omo tide om sika ma rural banks ni susufo no na mo rural bank ni susufo na ya sika ni ho bebrea e be support wo nti yen say enye say because oyo oba nti ne yen maniska because ni dwa odi no ne concentration no institutions na wo ho no om sika enso ne sapo mu nsu hye nti ye be bo foto ne dia masa rural banks no any companies here Juma at that level no must serve them.
But would that not be a duplication because of work at SME bank? No, that's what the SME bank do.
Into SME there are a lot of young people who are doing business on tech platforms, who are doing their other friend digitized businesses,
yes.
small businesses. And they are a bit different from your mama with Didja, Ewudjum, or Kokwanswa, Kofadia Ba, Utunia Maton, and we are slightly different. So for us, the two are two distinguished things. But I say can say, sir, interventions when you know, because question was about jobs.
Yes.
What's the scene na Juma Ewasie, a Juma Bibi Wasieno, and to me, Dr. Bawumia de Nisasi in Boso Kase, jobs is going to be a big agenda in administration, and you can be sure, say, from the track record, no, so Kase Sanima will be mining. So a number of things to open up mining. Yango ponche a good year. Na ne hwehwe no na me se nkofo dia sensu ne asase to say one minerals development bank, two opese aban no na ye prospecting of baby mineral resources no na wo na first also ko prospecting on nsuo ne ade no ehun hia se obe ani biom, three logistics wo hia e de aye mining no gold catcher machine any financing kakra unya no through the minerals development bank any the your friend is saying community mining process now I started to say airboa to fight galamsino so that we move people from the illegal and irresponsible mining towards more responsible and legal ways of mining. Today, it is estimated about 1 million people are working in the small-scale mining value chain. Can you imagine and estimate the number of jobs you be creating when we put in place this mechanism? So it's not just about chasing them and burning their excavators, but it's also about giving them an alternative mining in a responsible manner. Because because alternative livelihood, only mining nkonko do abroba na bibe. Ebiasiko benyo mining mun and compare in jonko. But a woman no baby obey to me any mining, woman machine, woman the financial support kakana fi science wato gold now or mine science wato under a gold for forex program, gold for oil program, and a gold purchase programs now. Afi our support to produce, our market to consume. Now across all of this value chain, there are jobs.
There are jobs. Me will bear two questions on the worker so far. Number one, on the number of banks that more proposed. I remember, say before the banking sector cleanup, the narrative out there was commercial banks adorso. For a country of 30 million people at the time, not the number of commercial banks I want were just too many. Consolidating some of them, maybe free banking licenses, maybe savings and loans and all of that. If that has been done so far, economy and share that and overcome banking sector cleanup, the challenges that they buy in completely. This manifesto promises about 3 new banks: SME Bank, Minerals Development Bank. I mean that would take us back to before banking sector cleanup days, no?
So Obekaya banking sector cleanup, no. While the finance minister at the time made this argument, no, the primary argument was not say banks no doors, so they should be consolidated. The primary argument was that banks no be wa more in new prudential requirements. No, CBI say was a liquidity ratio. ASA, it was say toxic assets. And more say you show assets or what they are papa you to me edges Canadian tuani po bear deposit. I will say do say NPLs non-performing loans as part of I will say. Despite the fact that NASA Finance Minister there was no bank that omitted this requirement. Omuka say be only being consolidated. What am I saying? So the problem was not as much as about the number of banks as it was about banks that were not meeting the prudential requirements. In the end, the number of banks is not really the issue. Now, if say it's been found out, say there are about two categories that here dedicated banking attention. SMEs and in the mining regime. What is important is that those banks, when established, continue to meet the prudential requirements. In fact, it's like any of the banks currently in the system. If you're in the system and you are not meeting the prudential requirements, and the Bank of Ghana no benyasem. But if they are meeting the prudential requirements, I'm not sure the issue is about the number of banks. It is about the fact that the banks are meeting the prudential requirements and are more importantly able to serve customers in the specific financial zones and areas. Development bank. But development bank no say in a particular a wholesale bank or just man on they are banks in the on cut down could be branches or the bracani or France and so it's not so much about the number of banks, it's about the functions of those banks and more importantly their ability to meet the prudential requirements.
And how are we sure in this policy say these banks almost services no be ring fenced na outside
and no bear the functions of first of all the regulators. The license are the more and there will be a universal banking license but two area of emphasis will focus on into banking supervision department of the central bank and it be making sure say or more fit within those categories. Into more board members we MD na say you are not meeting those requirements for
my next question on the waka so far the accusations, some of the policies you just mentioned, they are Neoma as a copy and paste from NDC. For example, the NDC has said, say, or more promise so be training 1 million youth in coding. And I'm going to change it. I know say 1 million youth in digital skills.
By the way, it's a coding idea in time, man. About that time, about that year.
Coding.
So almost on promise, and I'm saying on promise in the time.
Oh, not some Mahamaka.
Maybe sir, time man on promise.
I don't know the exact time, but I mean, say Mahamaka.
You see, so Tracy digitization journey now also. I know that a leading into this point now. It's clear why no create digital agenda. And then we see about Tina Bisan Kwalaya was when a friend Mr. Digital on better on the digital agenda. And if I was started building foundation or Shisheba. So no she the foundation no catch her say baby I made dream maybe 1 million digital jobs account. It's clear say follows a certain path however. So midway through the process we be Johnny Jinam Finfin. And I'll give you an example. We be Johnny Jinam Finfin. So as a person pointed direction be now claim say idea. As our politics we say Yahubi. And I'll give you two examples. Example back a free SHS. Now I start taking a free SHS once in 2008. And start in fact 2000. The year 2000, in line with your party philosophy, JB Dankwa can't about enriching the lives of people. You invest in NIPA. And then I be a manifesto. You did Dankwa starting. You invest in NIPA. You enrich the lives of people. Yes. John Ajikum Kufo buy no say obey capitation grant because it's not right. Say Ghana kwala you be one or not tifie because NIPA pennies. Education should not be a privilege. It should be a right. And to start a capitation grant. Now Dankwa Kufo 2008. No, I will build upon that with free senior high school education. And to me, just before 2016, then Mr. Mahama made a promise. So, okay. Or best started progressively free. And Nanado can say, it's an announcement, it's a good announcement because it means that you are coming back to the point we've been making from 2000 to 2008. Progressively free. Who follow conversation? A lot of evidence has been provided about the fact that even in the year that he said he will implement, several day schools no say fees they were still paying their fees. Now fast forward, and then he turns around to say so no the free SHS by trying to obfuscate the whole argument. say okay on the buy no Ghana for a kaya de Ghana for refi more another example. Tama transport fare started cost through. And a Dr. Mahmoud Bamian ka say, what that been one who said transport fares we say GPI for no more case because the petrol board cost or spare parts board cost it's understandable say also better on the transport fares more. So it's not just about telling them say men to how do you come up with a bold solution, an innovative idea? I best to put say transport fares no so what do you say electric vehicles na best of me boy Wasanswa Kase before the end of this year, the first bay 100 buses, ebeba. On him say, Ecolongy manifesto, 2 days ago, Yura Mahama, Oma Kolabi, the electric car be, Abren Ufi, and any Okotne Muna, Uchi, Yena, so electric vehicles are very good, is the way to go. Or Bayana, Fidaba, Kwakazo, no crown or the electric vehicles idea by. Into this thing about Omson Bay coding, I was
1 million.
Pajo Fentunchen, Ghana phone in any one or pursue digital agenda. One started as far back as 2017. One uncle for China no about digitization exercise, no. Then no cast or the 1 million youth in digital skills a bar. And my Mekasa who some last time be. In community time, have you forgotten? So I'm almost ready to say, "Well, abandon economy, nana."
All kind of digitization. Have you open? But so himself, no, your former schoolmate and friend Omane Boama would disagree with you.
About what?
And he's made the point consistently. Say, digitization doesn't happen in a vacuum. It should run on an infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And that infrastructure, no, under him as communications minister. Fiber optic, national data center, mobile day, that crowd digital center, and all of that.
And digitization here running. What is it running on? It's running on the national ID database. It's running on the digital property address system. It's running on the mobile money interoperability. Some issues now my litigate backwards because Ghanaians are clear now. First, no education and no debate, and they'll be so as one who committed to education. Be a culture. Another issue that came up for debate was digitization. It's settled. Quite recently, no person made another argument about health. And I'm going to see hospital back crowd. Now, when we started putting out the data, it's become quite clear. And who caught district by district? Abraham, information minister, I caught district by district. Ghanaians have settled that debate as well. So, one partner or invest in healthcare infrastructure. Say healthcare jobs. Agenda 111 we are about 60,000 people are going to get jobs in these facilities across the country. About 20,000 direct, others on the sites. And under the job structure, we are even now proposing a jobs abroad program. So more ye training even in health crampono. And you know crying ye train himself on Bayed Ghana. It be more through a government program. Ya be Barbados near there. Fee almost be opportunity to work under a government program abroad. No money is cradia brebusia or manuswanya kakrawum. And there are several issues I up for litigation. Say, you know, men am the bar first, men am kind of first. Ghanaian no say questions ben a die nim. Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia solutions ne saying. Ira Mahama solutions ne saying. Na so NDC ni poa. Or to say a bonyum no, but to me a kosa. But we no bano bisano nti problems ipa ancestors no yen de any den kofo some ancestors ne den onum so to aba ma MPP ancestors na yen man ebebo no
many honorable KOJO Oppong Nkrumah na aiding komo or a minister for works and housing or a vice chair of the NPP manifesto committee and yeneno AD and komo KOJO my last question and then we come to tax reforms where I think a lot of interest in social media immediately after the manifesto presentation na bebrina center on teacher for the flattery the promise to teachers say they will be incentivized to buy cars and then nurses for the identity. I would want us to get some clarity on that promise. But I believe one existential threat for us as a country the state of our water bodies.
That's true.
A result of illegal mining. It seems to me, maybe I might be wrong, but in the very immediate solution to deal with Yensuna air pollution, Manti Bibisa in the manifesto.
Priority number 12. So we have a bridge version now on page 30.
Okay.
Or say we are going to protect our environment, specifically restoring our forests through reforestation programs. So he talks about 30,000 hectares of degraded areas of reforestation He talks about 1,000 hectares of bamboo and rattan plantations. He talks about providing tree seedlings and plantain suckers in a minimum of 1,000 communities. Then he goes on to talk about ushering in a golden age for Ghanaian-owned small-scale mining. Now, why will he talk about that under protection of the environment? Because a lot of the small-scale mining are EKOSIISEN, and like you rightly said, along our water bodies, and they destroy insulo. In fact, me and Kasa may fly to Takrade as we flew over. You know, insulo brown. River
Pra.
Yes, because of a lot of illegal and irresponsible mining at EKOSIISEN. Or say there are two ways to deal with it. But obey law enforcement. But she said, oh, yeah, law enforcement. Now we create an alternative. Legal, responsible mining. I said, they are condemn. And in addition to the law enforcement, and I'm catch us one under the Baumia presidency, the government of the Republic of Ghana and a geological survey, I'm say Hana Gold, Hana Gold, Hana Gold, Hana Gold. And this our regime now, I'm say with the prospecting license. Because also mom is a baby also prospecting license, but say it's our regime no AB because yeah. Geological survey no among Hanewo. Number 2, yeah, mamu community mining licenses. And community mining any new thing. Yeah, pilot in this administration. Eh, bimu say na say or vice president. Adena ideas ni bi. Ideas ni bi wo hwa ne air function. Baby wo hwa any vision. Or can in ne crampo a mpanimfo say yate but say ni decide say yeko. And when you are joking, some first year in Shenism. A chrono, saying something no be never catching say anasi. Or no, so they are watching when you trim posse, young Fanko Hanebeko. One of them, community mining, a year Jumane. To say one, or mining by geological survey, 2, Yabama community mining licenses, no more. 3, resources are muhia, which is funds and machinery, gold catcher machines. Ya start ewa say, Mun Sabeka, and on my 4, muya, yato. Near refining was near the back here currency. It's a whole ecosystem which grows mining, but also reduces the tendency for Nkofo to go prospecting and mining in water bodies. Now, no way and a few we say soldier for navy for near the ATS in Susua or more air pamunko for Fisua, Ubia because I buy Mudriabu. Adiayama Moase Semunquasi, why are you still insistent? Say, per se. So it's a two-sided strategy, and you put say 2 sides ni na be adwuma so me.
Mayemra because of time to tax reforms, and maybe first off, clarify this: the promise to teacher for and nurse for, because we know say. Previously, there was a policy so be a nurse, not so import a car, a bar, or enjoy tax waivers. And at a point, that policy was abused. Then it was suspended along the line. Is that the same promise?
So what are we the all can even including the capacity of the vehicle that you can bring.
Okay.
And we also say I'm say 1.8 cc, not more than 1.8 cc. In fact, in our contemplation, within a certain period, wouldn't mean it be like we say why I say we're a car dealer because if we are a teacher now we're nurse now every week be and I say
oh the care
didn't go for all the send out no. And there are guidelines on it that are aimed at addressing sending for abusing the last time. You rightly said it was abuse. Just until now, even the capacity of vehicle, how many vehicles you can bring in for a period. No, are there per se? Ghanaian na or your nurse and now a teacher, or your medical worker, no teacher, no per se or talk car. Nemo so better the IAN or Ghana has a be or per se important. Taxation na and I say duties na. Yeah, to me, a year as part of incentives, I did more. So say also some money in a particular capacity. The point is that the lessons are yes, or the implementation of the previous ones. No, and on a year and himself boy, and to me a way without people abusing it like the first one was.
It is a promise. A buying a sort teacher for us, matoka.
Oh, in fact, me another variation. You be say a buying say obeto car. My teacher say one teacher, one car, one cancer. Who says the other confusion? Shut up, is up to one cancer. Or say, in fact, he was specific. Say 1.8 cc, and now obe to me at the album without paying duties on it. And I can tell you, sir, the details of it is within that 4-year period. You know, and that is an incentive that we are making available to you
for teachers and the criticism said a government that promised teachers laptops, teacher for if that same government there promise it, because that's some of the criticism I've read on social media. Say, so our government now is sign promise car, then teacher for should treat that promise with the contempt.
First of all, to correct, government in promises or bema teacher ni be a car. Or say Obama Kwama, wa kraka if you are butcher, Emro 1.86, would you be more wouldn't you have duties? And then under the guidelines have been provided, no, where to me the Abamukaya President Kufuor did something like that for doctors.
Yes.
For doctors.
And even nurses at a point.
And it worked smoothly until last minute in Kufuor, yes, Omdom Jim Nafi, the Pabako Peso crackers, Beya, if we know the pick up beer 2 point something near there in Eba. And then when it was tried a second time, no, the abuse was also getting a bit higher. So say guidelines, but it's not a binary of a talker. I'm a teacher for one casada.
For the sake of policy coherence, no, wouldn't you rather have probably said, say, ye be a quine amount for imported cars, but when we have 6 or so vehicle manufacturing companies in Ghana, why don't they buy from these companies? Maybe amount of time I would be trying rather than
no. You see, what be question a number of tax incentives to I know they could beyond teaching.
Okay.
Obi bia or person automated in Ghana vehicles. The tax incentives are being available to everybody. Number 2, Dr. Baumiamo also at this the credit scoring system about Ghana, so that they are secondly paying over a period a easy amount, so that you are able to pick up that vehicle, that made in Ghana vehicle that has a tax,
which is brand new,
and pay over a period. What be a horse on pay? Ni brebi ewo Germany, pachena car be 1.6 into a person there no ba because or a teacher. So to me, echo through the process, it procures our vehicle no. Na what they ba or me anymore. Dr. Baumia say, "Oni teacher for ni nurse for ni ade tenancy." It's one of their requests. Okay, so me ready some person me talk. They already kayama incentives for who Ghana has say. Let me person me there no ba. Can I get some help there? I say no problem. We'll give that one to you. So it's not counterproductive. Saying kaya there ye and I say ye deny the ye or Ghana in favor of this one and kaya counterproductive. In this case, the ye or Ghana crumple a bigger and larger benefit pool into any counterproductive.
The thing on tax reforms and the kind of policy proposals I'm looking at, say, because of the current economic challenges and the fact that even assessing the Eurobond market a problem, at least in the short to medium term, why would any government decide rather say my very constant source of revenue, which is taxes, afemo bema tax amnesty or more de tax Kenya ye YPF free ho ye bema flat rate? Why would any government want to do that?
Because uko the actual for friend on the cover by anymore the etymology of your debt problem now.
Yes.
Primarily because expenditures on government, government into me meeting. I know somebody will say, and if government is not able to meet the expenditures, then why do you want to give some more taxes? Because government, this whole thinking say was a buying or ye BBA to your BBA. A buying starts off by programming a lot of expenses in the fiscal framework. Budget to one of the first things out here in the fiscal framework, income, expenditure, and financing a won't fin quite balance.
Yes.
Accountants force it balance the equation. Okay. Economists say balance the fiscal framework. Now, who load the expenses now? First option revenue.
Yes.
Revenue no. Once our expenses we are could in a budget. Mr. Speaker, this year we'll do Accra to Kumasi Road. Yeah. Accra to Kumasi in our show. So obey. Now if you would train revenue. January, February, March revenue number, April, May, June, revenue and soon. Contractor also because we can you manage do 15% or the certificate about Trinska. We are buying the Abene so Obeko capital market, no finance, wako ton treasury bill, and answer wako Eurobond ako Pisca, now the baby to your contractor no. Ube you in a car will pile go over a period in your bid to satisfy the expenditure commitments no. A can eden kwa na ekostro. Se can be $1 now tia ye daunya 1 year depreciation of a significant effect. Se can 100 million kra $100 million, maybe a year, 100 million cedis because it's 1-to-1. Depreciation hit to 100 million to maybe 300 million. Now, so more basic back I've had several debates with our friends on the NDC side. Say change in the debt stock does not mean an increase in borrowing. Okay. Into Dr. Baumia say, so person who deal with debt problem and one of the first things I was saying is also cut your expenses. So to cut expenses, reduce the size of government. I say not more than 50 ministers. Watch a number of things obey. But one big thing I work on, maybe about tax question is so. One big thing I work on is also reducing government expenditure by 3% of GDP. But I'm in fiscal analysis now. Yet the susundu be too much. Susundu a percentage of GDP because 100 million there and yet the same as 100 million China. Yeah. And what the 100 million back to 2 GDP no 3% of GDP over 2024 budget of 1 trillion now. 3% of GDP is 30 billion Ghana cedis. Also, cut 30 billion Ghana cedis from the budget. And I'm actually say in the debate no cry analysis no. Now ebimu per se a bit higher, but in the end, or no economist or running numbers now they say no, stay at 3%. That's 30 billion. Now the moment you cut 30 billion of GDP off the expenditure tables, you don't need that 30 billion in on the revenue or taxes and even in financing. What am I saying? Until the first thing they say, cut the expenses, 30 billion, or cut now you can afford to do away with some taxes. Until I catch you say taxes be over 2024 fiscal framework ni de aye we dey to parliament ato so abawie nti na nkofo because na so obey 11 onyi ne ya ye we akoto so abawie e dey akotre yo man ya bom ho besia ne ade nyina we asanse awie ti untumi se be ensan ko wachi nko kan chense ya ye awie no me be bo besia ne nkrata me de bae ni but me ye wie ne san se candidate obeba 2025 president se obey se nti enne me kwa na scan enne no obey na etua nti and per se you can't do those ones. But watch him so cut it by about 30 billion next year. That's about 3% of GDP. Or Katia, he doesn't need all of those taxes. But what am I saying?
Yes.
He doesn't need all of those taxes. And the explanation is that once he doesn't need all of those taxes, he can afford to A, let some of them go, and B, reform the tax system. Into what taxes nibia obemanako. 2, reforms, you know. Because a flat rate, one of the major problems with tax administration is inefficiency and the lack of predictability. My crane man no catch us a problem back on say, "Oh, the name go contain anymore." Who say CIF ni say? But because do Ghana no now no because the dollar na calculate. Say change ya. Ebia wo name na dey kono full say duty on 30,000. But you need say duty near 45,000. Into Dr. Baumia say flat rate as no can. First rule is say import duties. A be CD based and flat rate. Into the container back of spare parts, but when you say container of spare parts, as I'm count, 40,000 cedis. To buy predictable. Would there be a container of enro babe your factory be when you when you say container back of enro we say 65,000 cedis. Predictable. But some workers say, oh, massa a born any higher than Togo. Okay. And we had the first part of the flat rate. The second part of the flat rate, they say, or say, and the VAT, we VAT a year. And say, I call levy upon levy. Cascading effect be o me did you me turn your man. A calculate upon each other. To me soon in out. Also be collapsing into a single levy. No allow for input VAT, output VAT. To make it a single flat levy, I claim mobia into predictability. Say VAT and confo evade VAT be brave because of the confusion in the calculation. Number 3, also we call Estonia. Or more income tax rate, a flat rate of 20%. Yen kase income tax no, o first 1,000 cedis will be to 12%. Then second 1,000 cedis will be 13%. Then third 1,000 cedis will be their economists friend of progressive tax system. Yen sa, or say a flat rate 20%. Inti me mami or ton idea was say so yen ejume we na so nya 10,000 busumia obi to 20%
of the 10,000.
Kwesi chum ojina ketua or yen business. In fact, ojina ketua, fana say any corporate income tax, ojina ketua, na say na ketua ye kwesi jum kwamba yena mutia. And I say mami nka wa say 20% flat rate. What I say, but yenka say 20%, ye more rate no by a flat rate. So 2 things will happen. One, a simple and predictable, and secondly, no, they are not food journey because of confusion near the end, to me participate, and also by broaden tax base, Remember, I said we are digitizing.
Yeah.
Think of be about tax brackets, a bit broaden tax base. Inti Obeyu, not only does he not need 30 billion, but Kakrano here and what trim and more people are now paying a better and a more conducive rate. Ni trim uponi, the niswadi huni. Kwesi ada yenu yanu mendisi for the manifesto bar. I will say a from better as a need be some senti most my dream chere
on tax
reforms anything. Cause se baby I do no enye eno ana me catch obi say enye kukurudu eyezu eza debi. Eye say issue nini Mahmoud Baumia any swadi hu on that issue nenuni. Yewura Mahama wadaroma also when swadi hu on the same issue any day. Na Ghana for na compare say me hwe mu away.
But flat tax rates, no, don't you think? Because Ibiaka said one tax a redistributive tax policy where you tax more from the rich. Now when you be a redistribute more any business where with the flat tax system, no, where memisika menyamitua 20%, kwesichum sika obenya 20%. That is not an equitable way of taxing.
In fact, we are of the view, and the leaders of the view say no more equitable. Say ubientia a proportionate part of the income, but then you're just limited to income tax. We're not sure. So
sure.
How are we implementing it? Uba VAT regime, no matter how are we implementing it? And so kanina buma. The leaders of the view say it brings some more equity, simplicity, predictability in tax administration. And
you don't also think, say, ebema some needed revenue and kabai benya to embark on the bold neomana ma promise, no? Because you need money to implement.
Totally agreed. But so again, what kind of manifesto now? Or say one of the first things or person and say, or per se adiebi ana first a bind jebon bo say obey no. O yifi a buying books mo, no the man private sector. Yenya kwanya me pese me chemu kakra. Or the no private sector na. He doesn't need government resources
to do those things.
It. I'll give you a few examples. Uko Kenya, se Ofi Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, Eba Kuruma. O my flyover be enam to say enam it's above the normal road. PPP, omnium say Chinese for being here. Omdom sika buy number ofwa. Edubedu Airport within 15 minutes.
You pay something.
And they use it to pay back the cost of that road. The government did not have to literally go and borrow money.
To come and do it.
Yes, I can. Uko America, yeah, utaiko ya ukoba own frame minto unkai. Uko America, easy pass road. Utia, that was so. Uba was a coin that has a bank coin that has a but my private road, easy pass road. Register from insurance, you know my tutia, ewo. Tama ye modeling, ye 30 billion, 3% of GDP. Ye go through the items in the budget that you can move. Then one of the things that came up it says school block, be a dormitory block and a hostel and a house of residence, any school buses. When him said, so Sawoto school buses are 700 senior high schools now what I feel it.
Yes.
So you hear school bus, you hear school bus, you hear school bus. Now Kasawoto. It's a lot of millions of cities. And it says 1 year now buying forces will be here. Tis buying bit here on the expenditure side. I say also buying budget to one.
Sure.
And now Eurobond, Kokojis can be here. And I'm a Dr. Mahmoud Baumia say, Inti se me kasa me pay o de fan say 70 private sector companies. Say omonto 700 buses, which is what about 10 each. And I'm a now and then you move a new bus. But instead of paying in 1 year, mean to 1 year, me to over a 5-year period. Into every year, I get 4/5 of the budget expenditure as free fiscal space. Me free space or budget name. So instead of buying 700 buses every 4 years, 700 pickups every Ubeko school bia, you see here pickup, you hear bus. Instead of that, no, you bet my private sector, you're not buying lease over a period.
Over a period.
It reduces your expenditure. It reduces your expenditure now. We don't need that revenue at the top. And already you are catching us a home program expenditure of more than 105% of the previous year's tax revenue in real GDP terms.
Yes.
Yes. And it is a whole new dimension. So we hear the tax reforms now. It fits within a whole new paradigm of fiscal policy. And the modeling now, running numbers, no, and the confidence. So, bet me a cut expenses way. Now, where BSR window to the private sector, it becomes big private sector opportunity. That's 30 billion Ghana cities worth of business going to the private sector, which they finance on their own, they raise money on their own, they profit from it on their own.
And
government doesn't need to burden itself, say, obiti our braba struggle to pay.
In that way, I heard him say even for government vehicles, in the vehicles are ministers near the movie use, government will now not buy them.
We will be moving towards leasing more than buying, because our budget allocation. I mean, for example, young MPs.
Yes.
Parliament doesn't give us cars.
Sure.
Official,
sure.
Judiciary, Parliament, more cars.
Sure.
Ministers.
Sure.
Executive,
more cars.
Executive, more cars. MPs, you my cars. There was a Okoji Bank, Bessiana, or they are to official vehicle, or the Bayajuma. They are buying a bay say, Obessiana, Ojo.
Yes.
Obema in Sibono, Yatson. No, it, and I say, Obe subsidize it and normal.
Yes.
But assuming Senka, you provide official vehicles for that purpose. Look at how much money it will cost. So now, assume say judiciary vehicles, instead of buying, you save a lot of money. Judicial service, judges are dying. Sebe, akawurem, uduha, sefim, courts are like looking almost dilapidated. I here refer. To me, it's our budget. No, are your core functions. Say, do you know say? There are a number of earmarked funds. There are institutions in the muno. What the budget nekesi? Nobody see dying. Anka says can get to me into service delivery. So if all that is happening is a private sector and so more see na yen lease ya. Say Ministry of Works and Housing MCBM say within the next 3-4 weeks you be issue RFP. Say yen sa sia ya why DC office buildings no. Yen train pa bansika. Private sector mumra. Na yento abasa komuni si dino together. You see, say two buildings. You see now all the back rented to car. Now me the back ma buying ministries, ni agencies and so private capital to solve public problems. It being a Dr. Baumia, we're going to go full throttle on the PPP model.
For that Ghanaian now, skeptical when he or she hears say a new way of doing things, move it to a new ideas, and yet the usual stuff among for in him. And I'll give you an example. In 2016, I remember when Dr. Baumia was speaking on the idea behind the 1 million per constituency. Good. He made the point, say, budgetary allocation, a buying budget for the year. And the 1 million will not be sika fufro bi abaye ko for free baby aba. Buying budgetary allocation obey in the year no. And omuyi mu at the time 275 million now accord directly to constituencies. When it got to the implementation of that novel idea, there were some challenges. And why should I believe a new way of doing things again from the same person?
So first of all, that idea remains a brilliant idea. In fact, for the 4 years, it was 1 year now calculate allocations are ambulances here. If you say $1 million per constituency anymore, and some sanitation systems you see across the various places, water systems you see, we couldn't do it for the 4 years. And you are right, there were implementation challenges. You're absolutely right on that one. But they be out for aeroplane. On my church was an airplane. No, these are the steps. Brilliant idea. Do be fit and can do takrade. Akoye program or nano fly baba. But there are times when, in terms of implementing that, who could do a portable catcher said there's a mechanical challenge. What is required to be done is say find a way to fix him and So where we have had implementation challenges, we have learned lessons from it. And that's why I say manifesto kind of year. Or say we shall include in the national budget a district budgeting component. That is drawn from the lessons I assume with the implementation of the $1 million per constituency. So that now in the building of the national budget, we'll be introducing a district budgeting component. Apart from DACF, Ombenya Sikabi for local infrastructure budget, separate from the DACF now. Because we've learned some lessons from it. So yes, I concede to you, there have been some challenges in implementation. As it is with many things in life, sometimes there are challenges with implementation. But you see your lessons, some lessons now you see, and I might be a sacra and free SHSA. Or be improve free SHS. The biggest problem is infrastructure today. Or bring in private sector to help complement what government is doing on the infrastructure side of secondary education. So we've learned lessons. Those lessons are the ones that are helping us to improve in the next chapter.
I say KOJO Oppong NKRUMAH and Yetinin Kanoye, Minister for Works and Housing, Vice Chair of the Manifesto Committee for the NPP. 14 minutes after 4, loads and loads of your messages, and also beboa the next phase of your NKRUMAH. At least more and more questions near deno na we ya no e dey be a question bi o ha mentimi emusai. Ye WhatsApp number is 0548 443 523 0548 443 523. Ubet me messages aba. After this short break, I'll read the messages. Na fe honorable ya no amayen na ya shedding common aba ewie. Stay with us here, Basisia.
Na science dia kesi agana fodi o power jet battery hono ye no kware.